Good afternoon, everyone. Today is the 21st of July, 2025. Welcome back for another edition of Crime in the Courtroom. I am your host, John Collins, and I'm delighted, as always, to have you joining us today. I'm looking forward to introducing another interesting and knowledgeable guest for today's installment because he specializes in what I suppose could be described as the newest of the major forensic disciplines and one that is rapidly changing in pace with changes and advancements in technology, which is digital evidence and cybercrime investigation. But before we meet our guest, I want to extend my sincere thanks to our friends and colleagues at Promega, host of the International Symposium on Human Identification, the largest conference in existence dedicated to the practice, challenges, and opportunities of forensic DNA testing. We will be in Palm Beach, Florida this year, November 3rd to November 6th, and so I hope to see you there. Each year, this important event is brought to you by Promega. For over 45 years, Promega has been helping scientists find the answers. Going beyond a focus on products, at Promega, we bring a network of diverse ideas and solutions to drive better results, not only for our criminal justice system, but to protect and preserve our quality of life through the practice of life science. Promega is the team that turns questions into discoveries. Learn more at promega.com. And for information about our upcoming symposium later this year, visit ishinews.com. That's ishinews.com. Just a few moments ago, I had the opportunity to indulge what is always a sincere joy of mine, which is to speak with other professional writers. In fact, just over the weekend, Mary and I visited a farmer's market in Holland, Michigan, a farmer's market. And there was a gentleman there with a booth selling his products, and I noticed there was a stack of books that he was selling, which were, on the table in front of him. It looked to be a science fiction book of some sort, judging by the cover art. And so I asked him if he was the author, and he said yes, he was. And so this kicked off I guess what I would describe as a mutually enjoyable conversation between two fellow authors, which is always a lot of fun and always very interesting, because it's quite useful to learn how other authors engage the craft of writing and how they write and edit and work their way through the challenging process of publication. And so earlier today, I was able to speak with another fellow author, Tom Arnold, who is an expert in digital evidence and the investigation of cybercrimes. Tom has been directly involved in the investigation of security breach cases involving unauthorized access to computer systems and cloud environments. He's been the lead investigator on large breaches where the target environments spanned over 7,000 servers and involved highly complex threat hunting to find the adversary or the perpetrator. Mr. Arnold has provided consulting to the U.S. Secret Service. He gives policy guidance to the U.S. government and other regulatory agencies. And he's currently developing the digital evidence and forensic degree programs at San Jose State University. And he also teaches in the cybersecurity graduate program at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. One thing I should mention, however, that makes Tom somewhat unusual and quite interesting to me as your host is that he recently published a novel titled The Digital Detective First Intervention. The story is how a 14-year-old and his friend use forensics to foil an international terror plot. The novel targets readers at about age 9 and over with the intent of teaching cyber hygiene and cyber security to young people. So please join me for my conversation with Mr. Tom Arnold. Tom, I think it was this year, you have a new book that has come out. Is that correct? It's called The Digital Detective First Intervention.
Correct.
Did that came out this year? You know, one of the things about this particular show is we will have people on that have varying degrees of expertise in a particular area. I don't think it's that common for somebody like yourself with your credentials to opt to write a fictional piece. This is a novel. What inspired you to write it?
I've been involved in this field for almost 30 years. And in all honesty, I have spoken to so many conferences, so many groups, and when you talk about cyber safety and cybersecurity, it was like banging my head against the wall. I didn't care whether it's adults, kids, whatever. It didn't really matter. Okay. And basically, an event took place about 2 years ago, if you don't mind me telling the story,
Not at all. Please do.
where my then 7-year-old grandson was playing a very popular video game on his iPad. And I should point out that his mom and dad are extremely well cybersecurity versed. The dad is the director of cybersecurity for one of the big companies in Washington State.
Wow.
And so all the parental controls were on, everything's on. And my grandson runs over to his mom and says, "Hey, look at this. Another player just stepped in front of me. An avatar basically showed up and held up a sign that says, 'I want to meet you. What's your name and where do you live?'" Now that's, absolutely a request for private information, and it was sort of shocking.
And he's 7 years old.
And he's 7 years old. Okay. This becomes frightening. The hairs on your neck pop right up and go, this could be really dangerous for another kid. Fortunately, his parents created cybersecurity and cyber safety as a safety zone. So even if they're mad at their teenage son and they're yelling at their teenage son, if it's a cybersecurity problem, the temperature goes down immediately. He's never penalized for it. He knows it's a free space to talk in. Okay. And that actually seems to work. So, what caused me to look at the digital detective was the fact that I needed some way to communicate with the younger generation. So, it's a book for, kids who are 9 and over. Okay. Although I get a lot of comments from adults basically back on it, which is great. And it tells the story of two teenagers who inadvertently fight cyber terrorism in this case. All of the cases individually and separated, all of the tools, the techniques, and procedures that are used in the book are absolutely real. I mean, they're from my own past history of cases that I've worked on and the digital cases themselves. They're just put together in a fictional way, if you would. And so I find that maybe entertaining the kids might begin to tickle a little nerve in the back. And there's a couple of reviews that came in which were spectacular, where the kids were actually now having conversations with their parents.
And the kids are probably teaching the parents.
And there's a lot of truth to that, you
Yeah.
know. And in one session about a year, almost a year ago, a parent made a comment to me that she was more comfortable teaching sex to her kids than she was teaching cybersecurity and cyber safety. She thought she was just overwhelmed and
Wow.
outmatched by the kids. And she was terrified to say something wrong that the kids would identify as wrong. And the next thing you know, they're sitting there, ignoring her because they made her look like a fool.
Yeah. You know,
Very,
it's scary. It's scary. Well, I should say one of the things that scares me about this particular kind of crime is the access that the predators have to the young
mhm.
and also the elderly,
Yep.
which are hugely exposed. I'm curious, Tom. The title of your book, First Intervention, sort of suggests the possibility of future installments. Is this something that you could see as a potential series? Do you have
Oh, it is.
ideas? So you
Yeah.
have some ideas for other works in this?
Well, no, I have a very aggressive publisher that, I told her I would have the second book by December 31st, and she says, "No, October 21st will do fine."
Oof. Let me know how that goes.
Well, I
I
am
know
a
what that
little over
feels like.
halfway there. But the next book actually takes on two huge topics, and it's the topic of sextortion and the topic of human trafficking.
Yeah,
And I'm trying to do this in a way where I don't have to go to the dark side of writing fiction, because both of those topics can take you to dark areas real quick.
yeah,
And I've got to do this in a way that I can still communicate to the kids. They understand the significance and they're not afraid of it.
yeah.
Of reading it, the book that is, you know. So
Well, one of the phrases or terms I should say, I think for our listeners and viewers that will want to wrap our brains around to kind of fully understand your interests in this area is the term cyber hygiene. And I was wondering if you could take a moment to sort of explain what that is. I find it to be a really interesting term, but also why should it matter to people ultimately?
Well, you hit the nail on the head first and foremost that when you said, hey, there's kids and there's the elderly who are vulnerable.
Yeah,
No question. Guess what? Everybody in between is as well, is my belief. Okay. And it's in by varying degrees. Cyber hygiene and the way I use the term really is a matter of understanding what you're trying to protect and understanding that there's a technique where I can ask small, little, simple questions to someone, but then at another time, at a later point in time, I can put all the information I collected and all the information that's online that I might have collected and all the information from your teenage daughter's chat room that I've
yeah,
collected. And now I can begin to, in the same way we in law enforcement would profile real bad guys, serial killers, sort of thing. Okay. Guess what? They're profiling their target at that point. And they're putting all these pieces together and they're trying to figure out, okay, so if I push this button or tug on this, this is what happens. And so cyber hygiene is a mixture of prevention, but it's also a section of detection and reporting. It's all three in my
okay,
book. It has to be a safe place. You have to know who you can go to get help. And with the advent of, artificial intelligence now, deepfakes are becoming a huge problem, and they'll
yeah,
become a much bigger problem. They're being used in sextortion cases right now, which is really, really bad. And there's got to be a safe place to detect and report, if my point is, because you need help with cases like that. The lone kid or even the lone adult isn't going to be able to solve that problem. They need help.
yeah. I wonder, Tom, is there going to be a day that comes, because right now, the internet, if you think about it in terms of human history, the internet's been around for about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And, so we're still sort of wrapping our brain around this whole thing, but I can't help but wonder if it's going to, I mean, obviously there's tremendous value in it, but is it going to get to a point where it descends or devolves into such a state of like just a, a pit of hell in terms where it's overtaken by, the dark side of the internet and criminals that something has to be done that requires people to have some kind of actual identity. Do you think that day might come, or am I?
I actually am not that pessimistic with regards to it. I think there's too many opportunities, there's too many things that are absolutely wondrous about the internet itself and the
Yeah,
internet space to sort of prohibit that. I am left by a thought, back with one of the earliest arrests, at the time I was working for a company that was, strategically held by Visa and doing payments on the internet for the first time. And, we identified a bad guy and we caught the bad guy and who was, committing fraud. And he made a statement that on the internet, the hackers are driving Ferraris and the police are driving broken down bicycles.
hmm,
Okay.
yeah,
I would give the police today a higher advantage. They're back up to maybe a Volkswagen Beetle.
okay,
Okay. Okay. The problem is and people constantly bring this up. Why is it that, we know that hacking occurs. We know all this evil stuff occurs. Okay. Why haven't we been able to prevent this with standards? Well, standards look to the rear, and that's how they get created. They look at the rear view mirror, basically. They don't look forward. The bad guys have an advantage of being able to craft something original each time. And that's what's actually happening. And if you look at the state of cybercrime, over the last 20 years, what that actually means. It's evolved something fierce. And what I have to stress to the law enforcement, comrades out there and everyone else is that you can't deal with a computer hacking or malware case the same way you deal with extremism and cyber terrorism because the methods that are used are completely different. Cyberbullying, harassment, cyber stalking, child sexual exploitation, all different. Okay, the typologies are completely different, and the methods that the bad guys are actually employing different. And the methods you have to use to forensically detect and evaluate and analyze different, is my
Yeah,
point. They have to begin to realize that. So the world, that's why the world's just evolving. So no, I
yeah.
don't hold that pessimistic sort of feeling that it's going to devolve. No, I think it's devolved plenty right now.
Yeah. No, I'm no, I appreciate that perspective. I want to learn more in just a second about your investigative background and how you kind of got into this. But right now, you've got a pretty strong academic set of affiliations. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're doing in academia right now, which obviously gives
Sure.
you access to young people?
Yeah. Um, I actually began doing work with California state universities and specifically Cal State San Jose and helping them set up their forensic science digital evidence program. And then I've moved on from that, and I'm currently at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, teaching in the graduate cybersecurity program
Okay.
and teaching specifically forensic investigations, and those types of things related to primarily cyber, more so than the law enforcement side of the house, although I do teach both,
Okay.
basically. And yes, that definitely sort of keeps me in the position from an academia side of one, having the ability to have the exposure to the students themselves, but also into being able to research specific topics, you know.
Yeah.
And an area of interest to me right now is the subject of artificial intelligence, deep fakes, and how best someone can detect. And I don't think we're anywhere near to being able to answer the how best part.
Yeah, I think the thing right the thing with the deep fakes is that what I've sort of observed over the years is with some of the lobbying work that I've done in different capacities is that laws tend to get passed a lot faster when the legislators themselves are exposed or their families or
Yeah,
children are exposed to risk. And a lot of these
correct.
legislators, when you think of elections and campaigning, this deep fake stuff will affect them, considerably.
Big time.
So I
Big
wonder,
time.
so for that reason, do you think that legislatively there will be remedies enacted in terms of passing
Yeah,
laws, establishing the elements of crime to deal
I,
with some of
I
the
I
stuff?
believe that's absolutely a possibility that they will move quickly. My worry, it's sort of like when Boston, Massachusetts did the anti-fraud and anti-credit card fraud sort of laws. Boston, Massachusetts, excuse me, the state of Massachusetts did
Yeah.
it. They actually tried to codify the algorithms of encryption that needed to be used, and everybody in the industry knew those were going to atrophy, and over time they were going to be dead. And that's sort of the problem if they move a little too quickly and don't take the right forms of advice, they're likely to do something that's, either too weak, too watered down, just to say they did it, or on the other side, they're likely to, imply and demand things that are not going to be viable in the next 5 years,
Now,
sort of thing.
Tom, do you do consulting work right now in different kinds of investigations?
I will do selective work as it
Okay.
stands.
Okay.
I worked in the field for almost 25 years, doing from the earliest days of digital forensic investigations right on through, and that's why I had the exposure into law enforcement. I had the exposure into other areas because a lot of times, in the early days, they couldn't just hand it off to a crime lab and say, "Here, go figure it out," because the crime lab wasn't capable of doing it.
Right.
So a lot of the corporations were ahead of the game. I guess the largest single cyber incident case was 7,000 servers. And the bad guy's hiding inside the network somewhere. Go find him. Uh,
And you nobody knew where they were. They're just parked
right.
somewhere in here. It's like
You
almost
can
like a
see
virus.
yeah, that's right. You can see the results of their activity. They're stealing this, stealing this, and then they got into the extortion game. This is way before. This is before actually ransomware. I mean, the whole purpose of ransomware right now is just to hit the alarm button and say, "Now you've been hacked. Do something because I want to
Yeah.
negotiate with you about extortion."
Right.
Okay, and they were kept coming back saying, "See, I've got this block of data from you now. You need to pay me." That's what they were doing to the company back then. But it
Yeah.
was in a network of 7,000 servers that you were trying to locate. Okay, where is he? What's
Yeah.
he? You know.
Jeez. And not only that, not only do you have the problem of not knowing who it is and where they are, but you also have the problem with the fact that these are pretty skilled individuals,
Uh-huh.
which makes it scary. The Tom, I want to make sure that we're kind of clear on the terminology here, the term cyber crime. It's one of those things where I probably couldn't give you an intelligent definition of what it is, but it's one of those things where like I know it when I see it. But how do we define cyber crime? Does it require some kind of online internet connection? Does it have to involve a computer? What actually is it?
Mhm. There's computers everywhere. Okay, let's talk about that for 1 second. Okay. Although modern cars over the last 5 years are online no matter what, whether you know it or not. Okay. They have SIM chips, they're on cellular networks, they're communicating to wherever. Okay. But we have computers all around us, ranging from parking meters through to your car's electronic control units that are in your cars. We're walking around with cell phones, watches, blah, blah, blah. It just keeps going. So there's some computational component to the question of cybercrime. And as it stands right now, if you begin to look at the typologies as far as defining cybercrime, it's massive. Okay. You can't sit there and say, well, cybercrime is this. You can no longer do that. When it was first sort of quasi defined 15, almost 20 years ago, that's what was tried. And the reality is, and I'll walk through the chunks of what cybercrime actually is. It's computer hacking. We got that one. That's attacking and trespass into somebody else's system. It's malware and automated attacks. So this would range from automated attacks that try to break into systems that embed malware in the system that steal the data that lead to ransomware, which encrypts the system so that you, the victim company, now know you've been hacked and you have to negotiate in some way, shape, or form. It's still piracy and intellectual property theft.
Okay.
It includes all forms of sort of digitally enhanced fraud, okay, is in
Uh,
there as well. Okay,
yeah.
is the way I put it. So the romance scams against the elderly are just, just make you want to cry. The scams against, people online. Uh, so then there's pornography and image-based abuse. And this is where the AI and the deep fakes start to pop in as well. There's child sexual exploitation, which has an entire litany inside of its typologies with regards to that. There's cyberbullying, harassment, and cyber stalking, which are kind of put together into a category of cybercrime. Which unfortunately, this is the teen that's in the chat room that's with her friends, if you would, where suddenly a friend is collecting data and now beginning to bully the teen, or is beginning to harass the teen, or it gets out that somebody else was logged into the chat room as someone else, but it wasn't them. It was a bad guy or a bad actor masquerading, and now you have a stalking situation. and cyber stalking. Those are one category. There
Is
is, yeah, there's extremism and cyber terror. Cyber right now from games, online games, a variety of online games are actually used to recruit people to extremist organizations. Al Qaeda has been very good at this. Okay. Whether it's right wing, left wing, it doesn't really matter. They both do it. Okay. Warfare and intelligence, and finally illicit market operations, which is the dark net. So
yeah,
that's the way cybercrime looks. It's
yeah.
not a simple category.
It's a big, vast landscape
Huh?
of challenges. Yeah. Tom, can you take a minute or two to just kind of explain how you even got into this, how your expertise in this area developed, as you know, as well as some of the work that you did as an investigator. Just kind of give us a background of how you came
Sure.
about this.
Well, I have to go way back. Okay, I was a policeman long, long ago.
Okay.
Okay, I was a policeman working out of San Francisco when before. Well, I was my department was the Southern Pacific Railroad Police, working out of San Francisco, and at the time, as I was a policeman, we didn't even have radios. So you now know how old I am. Okay, radios were just coming in. If you had a handheld walkie-talkie, man, you were the hottest thing out there. Okay. But beyond that, you had a radio in the car and that was it. So
Wow.
if I go back, and so did investigations, worked for local municipalities as well, left them. And while I was working for the municipalities, I was identified as a person that could help with the automation of the police department. I helped design and build the first computer-aided dispatch system, and I designed and built one of the very first criminal intelligence systems. Because criminal intelligence was, a room full of cards and seven people working in there. And
Yep.
you used to say, does this license plate have any relationship to some bad guy? And in 7 or so days later, they would come back with an answer and go, "Yeah, it's this mafia family." So it was right for, oh, welcome to a database sort of thing. Later on, obviously, I went into the technology side of things, NASA, other places. But as I got into internet and e-commerce with Silicon Graphics in the very earliest days, with the Silicon Graphics site and trying to take payments, I realized that there really was a truism, and the truism was claimed in 1993 by Peter Steiner in the New Yorker when he said, "On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog." Okay, and that's absolutely true. So I have what 16 patents that I don't hold that the companies were assigned to that deal with internet fraud detection, and theft of digital property, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Got into that sort of side of me, which tickled the whole old police investigative side. We put 16 people in jail, and then after that, evolved into a cybersecurity companies and beyond. And in the that would be 1999, 1998 into the
Okay.
cybersecurity field. So I just evolved and grew through the field. Uh, I got focused onto the digital investigations because at the end of the day, I realized there's only so much you can do in prevention. There's only so much you can do in audit, and there's only, so much you can do in detection. But, you got to be able to figure out what happened, and you need to know what happened to figure out how to defend against it.
And that's where the forensics comes in. I mean, that's
That's where the
what's,
forensics comes in. That's where the cyber part of the forensics came in.
yeah,
The law enforcement side just came along with it, because at that time in 1998, there wasn't, FBI labs in every county sort of thing.
yeah,
There wasn't crime labs that were fully adjusted, and, like Santa Clara County has a beautiful digital forensics lab. Well, none of those existed,
yeah.
yet the police were running into these computing devices and they needed help.
Yeah. I follow a guy and it's interesting because I just got his mid-year report. His name's Tom Asher and I had him on the show. He specializes in crime data, crime stats, and it's really kind of remarkable when you look at violent and property crime stats in 2025. They seem to be plummeting and it's not exactly clear why that is, but I have to tell you, I'm not, and I would love for you to have a more optimistic opinion on this as well, with regards to whether or not we actually know the nature of the threat and how, like, are we even tracking data? I've been a victim of cyber crimes twice where I actually lost money because and this was back in the days when I was naive to this stuff. But I remember one time I thought I was buying a set of golf clubs online, and it turned out
Yep.
to be just a complete fraud, and I lost several $100s.
Yep.
But how serious is the threat right now to the average person?
Well, it's intriguing. This is a very difficult question to answer because we don't have something like the uniform crime reports
Right.
that we have where every police agency, does their best to encode the types of crimes that are occurring and report them up to the federal authorities, to the Department of Justice is where that ends up. And we have the Internet Crime Complaint Center that's run by the FBI and the Secret Service and the others, but even then there's, you know, you made the statement, hey, that you had a guy, commit a fraud where he's selling you a bogus item. Yep, that's the vast majority of what actually gets reported. That is not the majority of what's actually happening out there.
Okay.
Okay. Um,
Yeah.
and the problem really is a question of reporting and where things are actually going. When you talk about property crimes dropping, I'm always left with the sort of impression that says, why exactly do you want to rob a bank? When you got to walk into a bank, there's cameras bloody everywhere. They do have facial ID, along with all sorts of things. You're going to hold up a gun, and how much are you going to actually get? You know, Yet one of our guys was working a case out of Tijuana, Mexico. He was walking down the street. He looks down the street. There's two guys standing across the street from an ATM, and there's something that looks like a 12-year-old kid holding a stack of probably 40 ATM cards, just draining that ATM machine.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, an ATM has what, about 25,000, $30,000 in it, when it's fully topped up. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and so if you can cause an ATM bust out or ATM cash out, those types of things, you can intercept the signal from the ATM that's going to the bank that says, is this a good card? And you can force it to be good no matter what. At that point, you can just keep inserting the card until you drain that ATM.
Yeah.
And by using a 12-year-old kid standing in front of it, the camera in the ATM is taking a picture of a 12-year-old kid.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a huge
The
risk.
bad
There's
guys
a
are, yeah, I mean, it's really bad. I mean, now I think that's right in there with the whole child exploitation thing
Oh,
myself.
how can it
You know,
not be?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
12-year-old
think you
kid.
can make the case that it's not. So there's the threat to the average person, but we also have, and you alluded to this earlier, Tom, the threat to particularly to, let's say, government agencies. Like I think about the Department of Defense and some of these really high
Right.
security, and they're constantly trying to stay ahead of the threat. How what is the threat like right now with regards to these firewalls and the security systems that are maintained by government agencies?
Well, again, I gave you sort of the feeling of the types of cybercrime that are involved in
Right.
there. And computer hacking, I sort of brushed over that one. And, the firewalls, you don't just hack someone coming from the outside in via an electronic means. You may try a variety of techniques. One technique that I thought was particularly well used against a company in this example, I realize you asked a government question,
Yeah.
was out in the parking lot, they just randomly threw USB drives and just in the parking lot. And sure enough, some employee, poor employee, picked it up and plugged it into his company computer. Thank you very much. I'm in. Okay. I now
Wow.
use what we refer to as a reverse Trojan. The application program phones home to me. I don't even have to break in. Okay. So that's the sort of things that the government is worried about. And so there is a stratification. Okay. Same thing with a bank. Banks have the wire rooms. They're completely stratified. They're air gapped from anything There are specific people that can go in there. It's very much like government high security. High security areas we had at NASA, same thing, as far as the stratification of what they can get to. If they're intending to look at something on the outside, they look at it through a machine that's in a lower security range than is the higher security range. So they do really try. But even then, you can have corruption, you can have people who are blackmailed, you can have extortions. One of the subjects of sextortion right now is to sextort against somebody and try to get them to go do something inside their company that benefits you. It's not a sex sort of thing. You're using sextortion as a technique, okay, if you would, to get to the extortion. So, I would say the government's in actually pretty good condition, but then again, they spend a huge amount of money. They hire a lot of the kids that come out of the graduate program uh, in cybersecurity. Uh, they train a lot of people in this field. The Air Force is huge in this area, as a good example. So it's become an actual sort of discipline and job in the
Yeah.
military largely. And there are large, large teams that do this. And there's a tight coupling between espionage, counter-espionage, and those areas as well. And that's why I brought up the subject of warfare and intelligence operations as a good example. Now, those can cross over into the private sector very easily. I've
Yeah.
definitely seen that in recent years.
The evolution of this particular kind of crime, does it pretty much follow the, changes in technology? In other words, as the technology changes, then the way that these crimes are committed or the access that perpetrators have to potential targets, does it just simply follow technology, or is it more than that?
It's a little bit more. I think you have to look at it as like an aggregate. Okay. In the sense that in the early times, maybe there were these techniques that would work. Okay. But then as people started building defenses, you adjusted that and you had to create a new set of techniques and then a new set of techniques, if you would. But it becomes an aggregate. It just compounds on top of each other. So you can't not defend for the easy stuff. And where the technology largely comes in deals with the efficiency of the attacker, the
Yeah.
ability to speed up the quantity of attacks, how they make the attacks, whether they supplement themselves with automated things at the lower end and the older style attacks to see are you still, vulnerable to something that you should have closed off years ago. They'll use automated tools to go do that.
Yeah.
Well, they're over here playing with the newer stuff, largely. They don't care how they get in, they just want in,
Yeah.
is the point. And, how they identify the target information, all of that sort of wonderful stuff comes right along with it.
You mentioned earlier the example of the investigation involving the 7,000 servers. Any other examples that of investigations that you were involved with or crimes that you observed that were particularly memorable to you from a professional standpoint, or that you learned from, or even that may have shocked you?
Well, I guess there's just so many. It's a little bit hard to pick.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I mean, the 7,000 really did show that we needed a technique to look across the network and begin to analyze the network traffic. And the network traffic still becomes extremely important. Even if your personal machine is compromised, if you were working with a security team, the first thing I would try to do is capture some network traffic from your machine to try to figure out what it might be inside your machine. And then we'll start sandboxing it and isolating it and doing all of that sort of good stuff. I don't necessarily want to pull the plug right away. We've learned that. If I pull the plug right away, then the bad guy knows. And now we turn into the whack-a-mole game.
Yeah,
They'll
yeah,
pop up over here. They'll pop up over here, then here, you know,
right.
and they'll be all over the place. Okay. So we don't necessarily want that either, is my point.
Yeah, yeah.
And had that in the cyber cases. Excuse me. I'll tell you. that one of the areas that I found most sort of shocking was in a case where we had taken on a device to analyze for law enforcement, and we're beginning to do the analysis work, but the bad guy, in covering their tracks, did put an aggressive attack tool that would actually attack the forensic investigator.
Oh, interesting.
And so suddenly this victim machine is attacking me, basically, the guy who's trying to figure it out. Okay. And when that sort of behavior started, it really did begin to alter. Okay, so we're going to start with a sandboxed area where my investigative platform might be a virtual machine in a virtual sandbox. Now we'll play with it first and see what it looks like. Okay, I don't see anything bad happening to me.
Yeah.
you know, because yeah, it took the investigator's machine right down to the curtain of death
Yeah.
and said, "See you later, Charlie. You're gone."
You know,
Okay. Meanwhile, because it detected the investigator, it's out there, screwing up other things on the system as well.
what popped into my head when you talked about we would looking into my own investigative background, we would call that a gotcha trap. I remember
Yeah, yeah,
in some and you've probably heard of this in some explosives cases where
yep,
a bomb goes off, but then there's a second bomb that's timed to go off when first responders show up.
yep.
And that's exactly what you're describing, just in a cyber
Right. It's just
environment.
in a cyber case.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, I mean, it came right. The gotcha is a great one. I mean, I knew that.
yeah.
Okay, but never anticipated it in a cyber case.
Yeah. So, Tom, how do you think? I'm sort of, this is a tough question, I admit that I'm sort of asking you to kind of look into a crystal ball here. But if you were to try as best you can to look forward into the coming years and how we might see these types of cyber crime or commissions of cyber crime evolve and change, like what do you think we're going to see in terms of how this type of crime changes in the coming years?
Well, there's so many influences on it, whether it be geopolitical or otherwise. So as geopolitical situations,
Yeah,
evolve, you actually can see more attacks of a greater volume size. You'll see more techniques being applied. In a variety of areas. So it's really hard to look at the evolution. Now, you can say with at least the close near-term evolution, as artificial intelligence gets better, and it's really not anywhere near where it could be or should be, as it gets better, it'll become a primary tool for things like crafting the perfect phishing that has the highest percent of return. So
yeah,
right now, a person doing phishing might send out, I don't know, 100,000 emails, but they may only get five positive hits. Well, that's pretty much all they need.
hmm,
Okay. But if they can increase that number to say 500 possible hits, that's a huge amount of money that you're suddenly
yeah,
looking at as an opportunity in there. So I would say that's one of the areas is a good example. The use of deep fakes to manipulate large groups of people, like in election situations, in corporate briefings, as a good example. The use of AI largely to put out false corporate briefing papers to notify the street of things or do a general notice. Those are all types of things that sort of worry me about the future largely.
yeah.
And I'm left with an old story. I'm so sorry for this, but I was in cyber early days, and I was meeting with some colleagues that were out of the U.S. Secret Service, and there was two FBI guys in there, and there was myself, and we're just sort of sitting around having dinner. And one of the guys asked the question, said, if somebody really did something and defiled your wife and really did something bad, how would you get back at them? And it, went around the room, and it finally hit this one Secret Service guy who said, you know what? I put his DNA markers into the sexual predator database. And I thought, okay, this tells you where things are going here.
Boy, it sure does.
You know, and granted, we were just hanging out, having a beer sort of thing
Yeah,
at the time. And, I was like, okay, yeah, that would do
yeah.
it.
Well, you when you mention the artificial intelligence, like it kind of makes me wonder these programmers and these companies that are developing artificial intelligence technologies, they sort of should consider themselves on notice. I mean, think about this, that, there are, for example, victims of shootings that have sued gun manufacturers and
Correct.
won.
Correct.
So what happens? What kind of exposure are these companies,
Yeah,
exposed to?
that to me is a really good point. And, the thing that I'm always struck with as an instructor is bias exists no matter what.
Yes.
It's just in the level of bias that's in the whatever research you're doing, whatever paper you're putting together, whatever investigation you're working on, there is some form of bias. Okay. And that really worries me because artificial intelligence and high-speed computational systems, especially, if we do see the reality of quantum computing as a good example, that'll be a huge problem. Okay. So you couple quantum computing, you got couple the artificial intelligence, the potential of robotics, and we probably are really close to the rise of the robots. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, but the reality is that at that point, the bias becomes exaggerated when it goes faster and faster and faster. And I think that's where it will also be very difficult for a prosecutor who's going to use that sort of product liability claim to try to deal with it from that standpoint with some of these systems, because how are you going to actually be able to collect the evidence with regards to that bias and how that bias was injected and why that bias might have caused a catastrophic failure of some kind,
Yeah.
if you would. Yeah, those are all things that definitely worry me. And, it's like science fiction coming to life in some light.
Oh, definitely. Well, look, kind of getting close to the end here. I'm curious, looking at yourself and the work that you're doing, and obviously the writing project is really exciting. What kinds of things are going to be keeping you busy here in the near future and the next few years?
Well, I think one of the main things is, as you said, there's a technical evolution as to what the bad guys are doing and how I stay close to that. How I craft the labs for the students to learn is a good example. That's why I'm looking at the question, I sort of wanted to take the deep fakes on in the third novel, largely, although they're a little present in the second one. Um, but I do want to understand more with regards to the detection mechanisms themselves, because we have certain techniques that we use, and law enforcement has techniques that they use to identify, photography, photo devices, and sort of very gently, let's call it sort of like a digital fingerprint on the images and the image capture. And AI has got to be somehow violating that. It just can't be faking all of that in there. And that's obviously just talking about the metadata, but then there's the actual image and the whether, image correction and what's going on between the pixels of your jacket and the background photo, those
Yeah.
sorts of things.
Yeah.
Um, it's stuff like that that becomes sort of intriguing to me in the deepfake front. The deepfakes that are involved that are text-based, that could be generated by GPT chat or chat GPT, excuse me. And I don't mean to pick on them, but there's many other agents out there as well. Um, those are actually can be pretty vile now,
Hmm.
as far as crafting, phishing and, crafting other sorts of communications, if you
Yeah.
would. So I think uh, trying to come to a point as to where you're educating companies and people, and especially kids and young adults. When kids grow up, they begin to trust everything they see online largely, and they. I'm not trying to make them cynics, but I kind of really am.
Yeah.
You, you can't trust. You don't know that that's not a dog you're dealing with. on the other side.
Yeah.
And so that's going to keep me very busy.
What if you were to if you had the opportunity, which you do right now, to give advice to people that whether it's consumers or citizens out there that want to prevent as best they can prevent themselves from becoming victims of a cybercrime, what would be sort of a short checklist of things that you'd recommend that people do?
Well, in the back of the book, I did lay out sort of some very basic items, with regard, just to try to educate, like keep your information private and understanding what private information is a bigger problem. Then be careful what you post, know your privacy settings, and use strong passwords. I hate to say that, but that's sort of the basic stuff
Yeah,
that's the litany we've been banged up with the last 20 years. But when it comes to parents and parenting over younger kids and teenagers, strongest suggestion is technology is not a pacifier. We see it in a restaurant. You'll see the parents arrive in a restaurant, the kids are being a little boisterous, they're poking and punching at each other. Here, Johnny, play with your iPad. Here, Mary, just mess with your phone.
yeah,
Just shut up. I just want a quiet dinner. Okay. We see that all the time. And that is danger, danger, danger in my book. So anytime a young child is going to play a game, initially play the game with them. Be with them when they play the game. Control what they can play. You can't isolate them from technology, by the way. I have a case of that of a Texas family just talked to me 6 months ago or so that where they tried to isolate their kids and everybody, and then they suddenly discovered that their son had a Facebook page. How the devil did this happen? We
yeah,
don't get a phone, there's no computers, blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what? He got it through with one of his buddies. Children tend to learn quickly on their own and many times from friends,
yeah.
which was the same problem we had with sex. Okay. Okay. That's my point. Speak to them regarding chat and voice sessions so that they understand what do you mean by keep your personal information private? Oh, okay, okay, I think I know what that means. No, that's even the name of the dog. Okay. I
Yeah,
mean, it's a large swath. You don't want them to be able to aggregate things to use against you. And then really describe what that is. And then anything outside the scope of the game that the child's playing that they're asked, like, what's your name and where do you live? Okay, that's pretty stark. Okay, is out of scope. We're not going to talk about that. You're not even going to answer the question. All right.
yeah,
And it's very hard for teens to digest this, especially when they're on the family vacation, they're bored and all they want to do is be back at the mall with their buddies.
yeah. Exactly.
Okay. And that's the subject, how you begin to broach that subject of what I call cyber tradecraft, which is really what the bad guys do to try to exploit and bring you into their side of thinking and trust them for whatever crime they're going to commit. Okay. They're just getting you to give them things gently. Give me little tiny pieces of meaningless information, and then we'll move on from here, if you
Yeah,
would,
yeah.
is the point. So that would be the sort of thing on the parenting side
I
that I
think
think parents have really got to come away with.
I'm sort of finding myself comforted a little bit by the fact that, this isn't necessarily like a cyber hell we're talking about here, because there's also tools that are available to law enforcement and
Yeah,
prevention, but the threat is obviously very serious.
yeah.
The fact that you found kind of a fictional outlet to teach young people, I think is fantastic. So let me close by having you just tell our viewers and audience about how they can track you down, find more information about you, and certainly get information about your book.
Well, I guess one of the best ways to do that, actually, yeah, I'll answer that with one response. There is a website called the Eye. Think of like the way Apple loves to do things with eyes, idigital.detective.com. And it has a great deal of information with regards to me and my illustrator, as well as informations with regards to the books and where to find the books, that type of thing.